I'm not really sure how to start this, but something happened to me last year that I haven't really told many people about. Even now, it still creeps me out whenever I think about it, and I can't shake this feeling, like I'm always being watched. I know it probably sounds paranoid, especially coming from me, a girl who's usually pretty level-headed, but after what I went through, I have every reason to feel this way. So, I work at this small company. You know, nothing fancy, just a regular office job, but the thing is, I usually work the night shift. I like it that way. The office is quiet, no one really bothers you, and it's kind of peaceful in its own way. Plus, the extra pay for working late isn't bad either. Anyway, I usually start my shift around 8 p.m. and finish up around 4 in the morning. It's a long stretch, but I'm a bit of a night owl, so it suits me fine. But one night, man, I'll never forget that night. It was probably around midnight. I'd been sitting at my desk for hours, typing away, and I realized I needed to use the restroom. I didn't really think anything of it at first. I mean, it's just a normal thing, right? So I got up from my desk and made my way down the hall to the restroom. The lights in the office flicker sometimes, like that annoying kind of flicker, where you don't know if they're about to go out completely or just playing with you. But whatever, I was used to it. I walked down the hall, and the restroom is in this weird little corner of the building. Like you have to pass by some empty offices, and at night, with no one else around, the place feels kind of eerie. But I wasn't scared or anything. I mean, I had done this a million times. So I pushed open the door to the restroom, went in, and did my thing. But while I was in there, I started to get this feeling. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? Like the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? It was like that. It's hard to explain, but it was this creeping, crawling sensation, like I wasn't alone in there. I tried to shake it off. I mean, come on, I was in the bathroom. It's not like someone could just appear out of nowhere, right? Still, I couldn't get rid of that weird feeling. I finished up and washed my hands quickly, avoiding looking in the mirror for too long because, honestly, I was starting to freak myself out for no reason. I rushed back out into the hall, feeling a bit silly for even being scared in the first place. But then, as I walked back to my desk, I could have sworn I heard something. Like footsteps. They were really faint, but it was enough to make me stop in my tracks. I turned around, expecting to see someone, maybe another coworker or something. But the hall was completely empty. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above me, and the flickering was worse now. It was almost like the building itself was trying to mess with me. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. Just silence. I figured I was just tired. You know? Working late at night can mess with your mind, make you hear things that aren't there. So, I shrugged it off and went back to my desk. The rest of the night went by fine, I guess, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Every time I got up to move around, it felt like someone was watching me. I even checked behind me a couple of times just to make sure, but there was never anyone there. It was just me, alone in the office, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. For a few nights after that, everything was fine. I went to work, did my shift, went to the restroom like normal, and nothing weird happened. But then one night, it all started again. It was probably around the same time, midnight or so, and I had to use the restroom again. This time, though, the second I stepped into that hallway, I felt it. That prickling sensation, like eyes were on me. I tried to ignore it, but the closer I got to the restroom, the worse it got. By the time I reached the door, I was practically sprinting inside, just to get it over with. But once I was in there, I couldn't shake the feeling. I was so paranoid that I started checking the stalls to make sure no one was hiding in there. Of course, they were empty, but still, something didn't feel right. I washed my hands quickly, and as I was drying them, I glanced up at the ceiling. That's when I saw it. There was a small hole, like barely noticeable, up in the corner of the ceiling. I wouldn't have even seen it if I wasn't so freaked out. But now that I noticed it, I couldn't stop staring at it. It was so tiny, but it looked like a camera lens. My heart started racing, and I felt this cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. No way. There's no way there was a camera in the bathroom, right? I left the restroom as fast as I could and went straight back to my desk, but I couldn't focus on work anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about that hole in the ceiling. Was it really a camera? Who would even put something like that there? I was too embarrassed to ask anyone about it, though. I mean, what if I was just being paranoid and it was nothing? But I couldn't let it go. So, the next night, I came back to work, and this time, I brought a flashlight with me. After sitting at my desk for a while, I made an excuse to go to the restroom again, but really, I just wanted to check out that hole in the ceiling. When I got there, I climbed up on one of the sinks and shined the flashlight into the hole, and that's when I saw it. There was definitely something there. It was small, but it looked like a hidden camera. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. Should I tell someone? Should I just quit my job and never come back? I was so freaked out that I ended up calling my friend and telling her everything. She convinced me to report it to HR the next morning. So that's what I did. I went to the office first thing and told them everything I had seen. They were shocked, of course, and promised to look into it right away. Well, a couple of days later, the police showed up at the office. They wanted to question me about what I had found, and I told them everything. It turns out they had found not just one, but several hidden cameras throughout the building, mostly in the women's restrooms. I felt sick. Someone had been watching us for who knows how long. After a few days of investigating, they arrested one of the night security guards. He'd been working there for years, and no one had ever suspected him of anything. He seemed like a normal guy, quiet, kept to himself. But apparently, he had been secretly filming people for months. They found all sorts of footage on his computer, and it made me feel disgusting knowing that I was one of his targets. The whole thing was so surreal. I mean, this kind of stuff doesn't happen to people like me, you know? It's the kind of thing you read about online or see in movies, but it was happening in my office, to me. Even now, after all this time, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I don't work there anymore, obviously. I quit right after everything went down, but the paranoia, it's still with me. Every time I go into a public restroom or even my own bathroom at home, I can't help but check the ceiling, just in case. So yeah, that's what happened. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. And I guess the moral of the story is, trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
It was early summer, and I had the whole weekend to myself. You know how it is. Sometimes you just want to get away from everything. Clear your head, right? So I decided to head out to this lake I'd heard about. It's not too far from where I live, maybe about an hour's drive. I'd always wanted to go fishing there, because it's one of those spots that isn't too crowded. Secluded, quiet, the perfect escape. I packed up my gear, got my tackle box, and drove out early in the morning. The sun was still low, and the air was crisp. I felt good, excited even. I had a thermos of coffee, my favorite lure, and the promise of a peaceful day ahead. I had no idea things were about to go sideways. So I get to this lake. It's just as beautiful as people had said. There's this path that winds through a small patch of forest before opening up to the lake. It's serene, man, just birds chirping and the wind rustling through the trees. I set myself up on this little dock area and cast my line. A couple of hours go by, and I'm just relaxing, thinking about nothing in particular. I wasn't catching much, but that didn't bother me. Around midday, I decide to take a break, stretch my legs, and maybe explore the area a bit. I left my gear by the dock and wandered into the forest. The trees there are dense, real thick, but there's this narrow trail that looks like it's been used by a few hikers or something. I figure I'll just walk for a bit and then head back. After about 15 minutes or so, I hear something, this weird rustling noise. It's subtle at first, but then I realize it's not just the wind. It's more deliberate, like someone's moving around back there. Naturally, my curiosity kicks in, and I head towards the sound, thinking maybe I'm about to stumble across some wildlife or another fisherman. But then I see him. There's this man, standing maybe 50 feet away from me, and he's digging. Yeah, digging. And it's not like he's got a shovel out and is casually planting a tree or anything. No, this guy is shoveling dirt in a frantic way, almost like he's in a hurry. There's this deep hole in front of him, and he's pulling out chunks of earth, throwing them to the side like he's desperate to finish what he's doing. I stopped dead in my tracks, frozen. I don't know why, but something about the whole scene it didn't sit right with me. I mean, who goes out into the middle of the woods to dig a hole like that? And in such a rush? My brain's racing at this point, and I can't quite figure out what I'm seeing. Was he burying something? Or worse, someone? I try to stay calm, but as I'm watching him, the guy suddenly stops digging and looks up. And I mean, he looks directly at me. Our eyes meet, and I feel this cold shiver run down my spine. It's like he knew I'd been standing there the whole time watching him. Now I know what you're thinking. Just turn around and walk away, right? But I couldn't. I was frozen, staring at him like a deer caught in headlights. The guy straightens up, drops his shovel, and starts walking towards me. Not running, but this slow, deliberate walk, like he wasn't in any rush but knew exactly what he was going to do. At this point, I feel the panic setting in. My instincts finally kick in, and I turn around and bolt, running back through the woods as fast as I can. I can hear him behind me, his footsteps crunching on the leaves and twigs, and I swear to you, every second felt like an eternity. I'm not a runner, but adrenaline had me sprinting like my life depended on it. Which, it probably did. I don't look back until I make it back to the dock where I left my fishing stuff. When I finally do, I don't see him, but I feel like he's still there. Watching. Waiting. It's like this presence hanging in the air. I grab my things as fast as I can, barely even thinking, and throw them into my truck. My heart's pounding, my hands are shaking, and I just drive. I don't even care about the fish anymore. All I want is to get the hell out of there. On the way home, my brain's racing with a million thoughts. What the hell was that guy doing? Was he burying something illegal? A body? Was he going to come after me because I saw him? I start convincing myself that I have to do something, report it. I mean, what if this guy is some kind of psycho killer and I just stumbled across one of his dump sites? So when I get home, I call the cops. I tell them the whole thing, about the man, the digging, the way he looked at me. They take me seriously enough, I guess, because they send a couple of officers to meet me out by the lake. I drive back out there with them, and as we walk through the forest, I can feel that same eerie tension, like we're being watched. We finally reach the spot where I'd seen the guy digging. The hole's still there, wide and deep, but there's nothing in it. No shovel, no signs of what he was doing. Just this unfinished hole in the ground. The cops poke around, check the area, but they don't find anything. No evidence, no footprints, no sign of the man I saw. They ask me if I'm sure I wasn't just spooked by something else, like maybe I imagined the whole thing. I can tell they don't really believe me, but I know what I saw. They filled out a report, but nothing came of it. No missing persons, no leads, no follow-ups. It was like the whole thing just vanished. I even went back to the spot a week later just to see if I could make sense of it. The hole was still there, but starting to fill in from rain and erosion. There were no other signs that anyone had been there. It was just empty. But here's the thing that still gets me, even now. I can't shake the feeling that I was meant to see him that day. Like it wasn't just a coincidence that I wandered into the woods at that exact moment. And the way he looked at me, like he was daring me to do something about it. Like he wanted me to know what he was doing, but also that there was nothing I could do to stop it. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for someone else to stumble upon whatever it is he's hiding. Or maybe he's watching me, making sure I don't say too much. Either way, I don't go back to that lake anymore, and I don't think I ever will. I worked at this Amazon warehouse a couple of years back. It was one of those massive ones, the kind that seems to stretch on forever. You know the type, right? Rows and rows of shelves, conveyor belts whizzing by, machines beeping, just constant noise and motion. That place was always running 24/7, like it never slept. And neither did I, for that matter. I was on the night shift. Graveyard shift, they call it. Fitting, huh? It wasn't so bad at first. I mean, I'm not a people person, so the idea of just stocking shelves, scanning items, and loading trucks without too much interaction sounded pretty good. Just me, a few coworkers, and miles of cardboard boxes. But after a while, the monotony of it gets to you. Everything feels off. You start losing track of time, what day it is, what time of night it is. The fluorescent lights inside the warehouse don't help either. They're so bright, so constant, it's like you're never really sure if it's night or day anymore. The warehouse itself was strange too. Like I said, it was huge. Sometimes it felt like it just kept going, like no matter how far you walked, you'd never reach the end. And the layout didn't always make sense. You'd swear a certain aisle was on the left side of the building, but the next night, it'd be on the right. Or sometimes the shelves would seem taller or the aisles narrower. At first, I thought I was just tired, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me from being stuck in there all night. But after a while, I wasn't so sure. The incident happened about 6 months into the job. I remember it so clearly because it was the night everything changed for me. I was in the back corner of the warehouse, way in the farthest section where we stored all the big bulky stuff. You know, like furniture and exercise equipment. There was this eerie quiet in that part of the warehouse. It always gave me the creeps. You couldn't hear the conveyor belts from there, and the lights seemed dimmer somehow, like they were about to go out at any moment. So I was back there, just scanning some boxes, loading them onto a pallet, minding my own business. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning, that dead part of the night where everything feels a little surreal, like the world's asleep, but you're still awake, and it's just you and your thoughts. Anyway, as I'm stacking the boxes, I hear something. At first, I thought it was just the sound of a box shifting or something falling off a shelf. You hear noises like that all the time in the warehouse, but this was different. It wasn't a clatter or a crash. It was footsteps. Not loud, but soft, deliberate, like someone was walking down the aisle towards me. Now, we had cameras all over the warehouse, and technically no one else was supposed to be back in that section at that time. But I figured maybe it was one of the supervisors doing a check or something. I called out, "Hello? Someone there?" No response. Just more footsteps, closer this time. I stood there, scanning the rows of shelves, trying to see if I could catch a glimpse of who it was. But the way the lights flickered and cast shadows, I couldn't see anyone. I started walking down the aisle, towards the sound, hoping to catch whoever it was. But as soon as I turned the corner, the footsteps stopped. Dead silence. I called out again, but nothing. Just the hum of the lights overhead. At this point, I'm starting to feel a little uneasy. The air felt thick, like something was pressing down on me. You ever get that feeling? Like something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it? I shrugged it off and went back to stacking boxes. Maybe I was hearing things. Night shifts mess with your head, you know? But then, as I'm bending down to grab another box, I hear it again. The footsteps. This time they were faster, like someone was running. I stood up straight and spun around, trying to catch a glimpse of who or what it was. But again, nothing. Just rows of shelves stretching out into the dim light. My heart was pounding now. I was starting to get really freaked out. I've worked in warehouses before, and yeah, they can be creepy at night. But this was different. This felt wrong. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 3:17 a.m. I still had a few more hours on my shift, but I was seriously considering just leaving. Screw the job, right? But I couldn't. I needed the money. I tried to focus on my work again, but my mind kept drifting back to those footsteps. Who or what was back there with me? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, like there were eyes on me, hiding in the shadows between the shelves. Every little noise made me jump. Every creak of a box shifting or the distant hum of a machine felt sinister, like it was alive. And then I saw it. I was reaching up to grab a box from a high shelf when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Just a flicker of something at the far end of the aisle. I froze, my hand still gripping the box. Slowly, I turned my head, trying to focus on what I saw. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a shadow or a reflection. But then it moved again, darting from one side of the aisle to the other. My throat went dry. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was stand there and watch as this thing, whatever it was, moved closer. It was tall, hunched over, with long arms that seemed to drag on the floor as it shuffled towards me. Its skin, if you could call it skin, was pale, almost translucent, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. And its face, God, its face. It didn't have eyes, just empty sockets where eyes should have been. But I swear it was looking right at me. I dropped the box and stumbled back, my legs shaking, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Run? Hide? I was frozen in place, watching this thing slowly make its way towards me. It wasn't in a hurry, almost like it was toying with me, enjoying the fear that was radiating off me. I don't know how, but I managed to snap out of it. I turned and ran. I didn't care where, just away from that thing. I sprinted down the aisle, weaving between shelves, knocking over boxes, anything to put distance between me and whatever the hell that thing was. But no matter how fast I ran, I could still hear it behind me. The soft shuffle of its feet, the scraping of its long arms dragging on the ground. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I made it to the front of the warehouse, near the loading docks. I burst through the door, gasping for air, my heart hammering in my chest. The other guys on shift were standing around, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. One of them, Mike, came over and asked what the hell was wrong with me. I couldn't even speak. I just pointed back towards the warehouse, trying to form words, but nothing came out. They must have thought I was having some kind of breakdown or something. I couldn't blame them. I mean, what was I supposed to say? That there was a monster stalking the aisles? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. But I know what I saw. I'll never forget it. I quit the next day, didn't even bother to give notice, just walked out and never looked back. I couldn't. Every time I think about that place, about what I saw, I get this sinking feeling in my gut, like it's still there, waiting for me. Some nights when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can still hear those footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming closer. I tell myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know the truth. It's out there, and it's waiting. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes and sending shivers through the old house. I had always loved this old place, a sprawling Victorian home that had been in my family for generations. Its creaky floors and shadowy corners had always been a source of comfort, a retreat from the world's chaos. But tonight, with the storm raging outside and the house enveloped in darkness, something felt different. I was alone, my family having left for a weekend trip. I was glad to have the house to myself, to enjoy a rare moment of peace. I had spent the day setting up a cozy spot in the living room with blankets and snacks, planning to settle in with a good book and a few movies. The power had flickered a few times, but nothing unusual for a stormy night. I had prepared myself for an evening of solitude. The clock had just struck 10 when the first knock came. It was a soft, hesitant knock, almost as if it were afraid of being heard. I glanced at the clock, puzzled. Who could be visiting at this hour in such weather? I approached the front door with a mix of curiosity and unease. The storm had grown fiercer, and I could barely make out the silhouette of a figure through the frosted glass. Opening the door, I was met with a chilling sight. There was no one there, just the empty porch and the storm raging on. I peered out into the darkness, expecting to see someone retreating into the night, but there was no sign of anyone. Shaking my head, I closed the door and locked it, brushing off the feeling of unease. I returned to the living room, but the uneasy feeling persisted. I tried to focus on my book, but the shadows seemed to dance more menacingly than usual. The storm's fury outside created an eerie soundtrack, with thunder rumbling like a growl and lightning illuminating the room in stark, unsettling flashes. An hour passed with no further disturbances, and I began to relax. I had just settled into the couch with a cup of tea when the knocking returned, this time louder and more insistent. I nearly spilled my tea in surprise. I stood up and walked back to the front door, my heart racing. This time, I could see a figure more clearly through the frosted glass. The silhouette was tall, and the knocking was relentless. I hesitated, my mind racing through possible explanations. Maybe it was someone in distress, or perhaps it was a prank. I opened the door cautiously, but the porch was empty once again. I stepped outside, bracing myself against the storm, but there was no sign of anyone. The wind whipped around me, and the rain pelted down in sheets. The only sound was the roaring of the storm and the occasional crack of lightning. Just as I was about to go back inside, I noticed something on the ground. It was a small, old-fashioned brass key. It glinted in the dim light from the porch, as if it had been waiting for me to find it. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand, and wondered what it could possibly open. The key was an odd thing to find on a night like this. I glanced around one more time, but there was still no sign of anyone. With a shiver, I went back inside and locked the door behind me, placing the key on the table next to the front door. The rest of the evening passed in uneasy silence. The storm continued to rage, and the knocking did not return. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, but it lingered. As the clock struck midnight, I decided to investigate the key further. I examined the key closely. It was ornate, with intricate designs that suggested it was quite old. I wondered if it might open something in the house. There were a few locked rooms and old cupboards that had always intrigued me. I decided to start with the basement. The basement was a dark, musty place. The stairs creaked ominously as I descended, and the air grew colder with each step. I reached the bottom and fumbled for the light switch. The bulb flickered and buzzed before casting a weak light over the cluttered space. I scanned the room, my eyes settling on an old wooden chest in the corner. It was dusty and cobweb-covered, but there was a small keyhole on the front that matched the key I had found. My heart pounded as I approached the chest, the key clutched tightly in my hand. With a deep breath, I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The chest creaked open, revealing its contents. Inside, there were old, yellowed papers and a few dusty books. But what caught my eye was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn and tattered. I picked up the journal, feeling its weight in my hands. The pages were filled with a cramped, spidery handwriting. I opened it carefully and began to read. The entries were dated over a century ago and spoke of strange occurrences in the house. Whispers in the night, shadows moving on their own, and an uninvited guest who never seemed to leave. The last entry was dated the night of a terrible storm, much like the one I was experiencing. It described a visitor who arrived with a key, claiming to be seeking refuge. My heart skipped a beat. The journal ended abruptly, with the writer's final words hinting at something sinister, a presence that would remain until it had what it sought. As I finished reading, a chill ran down my spine. The storm outside roared louder, and I could hear the knocking again, this time coming from all sides of the house. I felt a sense of dread wash over me. What was the key for, and who or what had it belonged to? I closed the journal and placed it back in the chest, locking it once more. The knocking continued, growing louder and more frantic. I hurried upstairs, my mind racing. I felt as though I was being watched, the oppressive atmosphere of the house closing in around me. I decided to call for help, but my phone was dead. The storm had likely disrupted the power, and the landline was dead as well. I was completely cut off, alone in a house that seemed to come alive with sinister intent. As the night wore on, I found myself unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. The knocking persisted, a relentless reminder that something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was hiding something from me, something connected to the mysterious journal and the uninvited guest of long ago. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a night that would unravel secrets buried deep within the walls of my family home. The storm continued to rage, its fury unabated as I lay awake in my bed, the covers pulled tight around me. The house felt colder than usual, and the knocking had ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me from all sides. I glanced at the clock, 2:30 a.m. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway was the only sound that broke the silence. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, the journal's unsettling entries echoing in my head. I had to know more to understand what was happening. With a trembling hand, I picked up the journal from the nightstand where I had left it. The weight of it seemed heavier now, laden with the secrets it held. I flipped through the pages, searching for clues that might explain the strange occurrences. One entry caught my eye. It described a hidden room in the house, a place where the writer had discovered something both terrifying and profound. The description was vague, mentioning a secret chamber behind the false wall in the library. My heart raced as I recalled the library, a room I rarely used but had always found oddly intriguing. I decided to investigate. The storms howling outside made me feel like I was in a world apart, isolated and vulnerable. I pulled on a heavy coat and grabbed a flashlight, determined to find the hidden room mentioned in the journal. With one last glance at the clock, I crept downstairs. The library was just as I remembered, dusty and cluttered, filled with old books and antiques. The room was dimly lit by the flashlight's beam, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I began to search for any signs of a hidden passage or false wall. After what felt like hours of searching, I found it. A faint seam in the wall behind a large, overstuffed bookcase. My hands shook as I traced the seam, feeling a slight draft coming from behind it. I pulled the bookcase away from the wall, revealing a narrow passage. I squeezed through the passage, my flashlight illuminating the dark space ahead. The passage led to a small, hidden room, its walls lined with shelves and strange artifacts. At the center of the room was an old, ornate mirror covered in dust. The mirror's frame was intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. I approached the mirror, feeling a sense of unease. The journal had mentioned the mirror, describing it as a portal to another realm. I reached out to touch it, but as my fingers brushed the glass, I felt a sudden chill. The mirror's surface began to ripple, distorting my reflection. My heart pounded as I stared into the shifting image. The reflection showed not just me, but a shadowy figure standing behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. I stood frozen in front of the mirror, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The shadows in the room seemed to twist and contort around me, their movements synchronized with the storms howling outside. The sense of dread was palpable, and I could hardly tear my eyes away from the mirror's surface. Trying to steady myself, I reached out and touched the mirror again, this time with more determination. The surface felt cold, almost metallic. As I touched it, the mirror's glass began to shimmer and ripple more violently. The distorted reflection now showed not just me, but a series of fleeting images. People from a bygone era, their faces twisted in expressions of fear and despair. One image in particular stood out. It was of a woman, her face partially obscured by shadows, but her eyes were wide and filled with terror. She seemed to be reaching out, her hand pressed against the glass as if trying to break free. I was about to pull away when the mirror's surface suddenly cleared, returning to its normal reflective state. I stumbled back, my heart racing. What had I just seen? The journal had mentioned something about a mirror that trapped souls, but I hadn't taken it seriously. Now, with what I had witnessed, the idea seemed disturbingly plausible. As I turned to leave the hidden room, I noticed something on one of the shelves, a small weathered box. It was adorned with similar symbols to those on the mirror. I carefully opened the box and found it filled with old letters, each sealed with wax. The letters were addressed to different people, all written in the same elegant script. I picked up one of the letters and broke the seal. Inside, I found a letter written by someone who identified themselves as the caretaker of the house. The letter spoke of a curse placed upon the house, one that trapped the souls of those who had wronged the caretaker in life. The mirror was mentioned as a conduit for the curse, a way for the trapped souls to reach out to the living. The letter detailed how the curse would be perpetuated through the appearance of uninvited guests who would come seeking refuge but would never leave. The final lines of the letter were chilling. They will come at night, driven by a force beyond their understanding. Beware, for the house will never let them go. My blood ran cold. The description matched the events of the night perfectly. The knocking at the door, the key, and the unsettling presence. It all seemed to fit into a larger, more sinister narrative. I quickly gathered the letters and returned them to the box, placing it back on the shelf. I knew I had to get out of the hidden room and back to safety. As I made my way through the narrow passage, I could hear the knocking again, louder and more insistent than before. I climbed back through the passage and replaced the bookcase, making sure it was securely in place. The house seemed to be closing in on me, its walls whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I hurried back upstairs, my mind racing with the implications of what I had discovered. The knocking continued, now accompanied by a faint whispering sound that seemed to come from all directions. I felt as if the house itself was alive, reacting to the knowledge I had uncovered. The storm outside had reached its peak, and the wind howled with an almost mocking intensity. I decided to confront whatever was causing the disturbances. I grabbed a flashlight and a heavy iron fireplace poker for protection, determined to face whatever was lurking in the house. With a deep breath, I made my way through the darkened corridors, the shadows playing tricks on my eyes. I reached the main hallway and noticed something peculiar, a faint light coming from the front door. The knocking had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. I approached the door cautiously, the poker held tightly in my hand. The light seemed to be coming from beneath the door. I slowly turned the knob and opened the door, but there was no one there. The porch was empty, and the storm's fury had lessened. However, the light continued to glow faintly on the ground. I bent down to investigate and found another key, this one even more ornate than the first. I picked up the key, feeling a sense of dread. What could this key possibly unlock? The journal had mentioned something about multiple keys, each one leading to a different part of the house. I had to find out what this key was for, but I knew I had to be cautious. I decided to return to the library and search for any other hidden compartments or secrets. As I walked back, I could feel the oppressive atmosphere of the house growing heavier. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the whispers grew louder, almost as if they were urging me to leave. I reached the library and began searching once again. The key I had found seemed to resonate with the house, as if it were guiding me to something. I started by examining the bookshelves more closely, looking for anything that might be out of place. After some time, I found a small, inconspicuous panel behind a row of books. It was well hidden, but the keyhole was visible. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The panel creaked open, revealing a small compartment inside. Inside the compartment was a single, old photograph. It was a black and white image of a group of people standing in front of the house. The photograph was faded, but I could make out their faces. They looked solemn, almost as if they were standing before their final moments. In the center of the photograph was a woman, her face strikingly similar to the one I had seen in the mirror. She was holding a small, ornate box, similar to the one I had found earlier. The resemblance was uncanny, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The photograph was dated from the same time period as the journal entries. It seemed to confirm the connection between the house's past occupants and the curse described in the letters. I needed to understand more, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. As I stood there, examining the photograph, I heard a loud crash from the upper floor. The house seemed to be in turmoil, and the whispers had turned into frantic murmurs. I knew I had to act quickly. Whatever was happening, it was escalating. I left the library and raced up the stairs, following the sounds of chaos. The house was in disarray, with objects scattered and furniture overturned. I reached the top of the stairs and saw that the door to my bedroom was ajar. The knocking had returned, now louder than ever. I pushed open the door and was met with a chilling sight. The room was empty, but the mirror on the wall was shattered, its pieces scattered across the floor. The air was thick with an unnatural cold, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist. I glanced around the room, my heart pounding. The journal's warnings and the events of the night were converging into something terrifyingly real. The house was reacting to my presence, and I could feel its malevolent energy growing stronger. With no other options, I decided to confront the source of the disturbances head-on. I grabbed the flashlight and the poker, preparing myself for whatever lay ahead. I had to find a way to end the curse and free the trapped souls, or risk becoming one of them. The storm outside had subsided, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I felt a sense of foreboding as I moved through the house, searching for answers. The knocking had stopped, but the whispers remained, growing fainter as I approached the basement once again. The basement was even colder now, the air thick with an oppressive sense of dread. The remnants of the storm had left a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. I descended the stairs once more, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The hidden room was still as I had left it, the small box of letters and the mirror's shattered remnants, a testament to the house's dark history. I needed to find a way to break the curse, but the answers eluded me. The photograph and letters had given me glimpses into the past, but I needed more. I recalled the last entry in the journal, which had mentioned a ritual to break the curse. It described a series of actions that needed to be performed at midnight, involving the mirror and the artifacts found in the hidden room. The time was approaching, and I had to act quickly. I gathered the letters, the photograph, and the ornate box, placing them in a central location in the hidden room. I positioned the mirror fragments around them, creating a makeshift altar. I followed the instructions from the journal, lighting candles and arranging the items in a specific pattern. As the clock neared midnight, I could feel the house's tension mounting. The air grew colder, and the whispers became more urgent. I recited the incantations from the journal, trying to follow the ritual as closely as possible. The mirror shards seemed to respond, their reflections flickering and shifting. Suddenly, the temperature dropped dramatically. The shadows in the room swirled and converged, forming a dark, menacing shape. I felt an overwhelming sense of despair and anger emanating from the presence. It was as if the very essence of the house's curse was manifesting before me. The figure took shape, revealing the woman from the photograph. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and rage, and she reached out towards me. I could feel her presence, the anguish of countless souls trapped by the curse. Her gaze seemed to plead for release. I continued with the ritual, my voice steady despite the growing terror. As I chanted the final words, the air grew warmer, and the shadows began to recede. The figure's expression softened, and a sense of calm began to fill the room. It was as if the curse was being lifted, the souls finally finding peace. The temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere dissipated. The whispers fell silent, and the house seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. The mirror's shards stopped shifting, and the reflection returned to normal. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the darkness that had plagued the house finally dissipating. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The curse had been broken, and the trapped souls were finally free. The house felt different now, lighter and more welcoming. The storm outside had passed, leaving a tranquil quiet in its wake. I carefully gathered the items from the hidden room, placing them back in the box and sealing it once more. I knew that the house's history would always be a part of its fabric, but the darkness had been banished for now. As I left the basement and made my way back upstairs, I glanced at the clock. The night was almost over, and the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the windows. The house was quiet, its secrets finally laid to rest. This happened about a year ago. I had just gotten out of a long relationship, and I needed a break. A change of scenery, you know? That's why I decided to take this solo trip to Thailand. I'd never been before, and honestly, the idea of just wandering around Bangkok, eating street food, seeing temples, and being somewhere completely different sounded perfect. I wanted to get lost in a way, clear my head. I didn't book anything fancy, just a small hotel in the older part of Bangkok. You know, the kind of place that feels like it's been there forever. Like, not quite falling apart, but with this, I don't know, aged vibe. The kind of place where you can imagine people staying like 100 years ago or something. Anyway, I didn't think much of it when I checked in. The guy at the front desk was this older man who spoke broken English. He didn't smile much, but I figured whatever, maybe that's just his way. My room was on the 3rd floor, down this long hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The carpet was this faded red, and there were these old wooden doors with brass numbers on them. My door was kind of heavy, and when I opened it, the room was pretty basic. A bed, a nightstand, a small TV mounted on the wall that looked like it hadn't worked since the 90s, and a bathroom off to the side. Nothing special, but it was fine. I didn't plan to spend much time there anyway, so I spent the first day exploring Bangkok. I was out most of the day, and by the time I got back to the hotel, it was already dark. The city was loud, but inside the hotel, it was weirdly quiet, like too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person in the building. I didn't think too much of it, though. I was exhausted. I took a quick shower and crashed on the bed. I don't even remember falling asleep, but I must have been out cold because the next thing I knew it was like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I woke up to this sound. At first, I wasn't even sure what it was. Like I thought maybe it was just my imagination or some random noise outside. But then I heard it again. It was the sound of water running. Like someone had just turned on a faucet or flushed the toilet. It was coming from the bathroom. Now I know what you're thinking. Probably just the pipes, right? Old hotels have noisy plumbing, and that's what I told myself too. But it felt weird, like really weird. I could feel this chill run down my spine, but I didn't want to freak myself, so I just stayed in bed, telling myself it was nothing. The water stopped after a minute or two, and everything went quiet again. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. My heart was racing for no reason, and every time I closed my eyes, I just felt off. You know that feeling when you're being watched? Yeah, it was like that. But I was alone, right? I mean, it was just me in the room, or at least that's what I thought. Somehow, I eventually drifted off again. The next morning, I woke up feeling kind of groggy, like I hadn't slept well. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand to check the time, and that's when I saw it. There was a new photo in my camera roll. My heart practically stopped when I opened it. It was a picture of me, sleeping, in that bed, from last night. At first, I couldn't process it. Like you ever have those moments where your brain just refuses to accept what you're seeing? I stared at the photo for what felt like forever, just trying to figure out how the hell it got there. My phone had been right next to me all night. I hadn't touched it. And the photo, there's no way I could have taken it. It was like someone else had been standing there, at the foot of the bed, watching me sleep. I felt sick. My stomach turned, and my hands started shaking. I immediately jumped out of bed and looked around the room, but nothing seemed out of place. The door was still locked from the inside, and the windows were closed. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe I'd accidentally taken the photo myself before falling asleep. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. The angle, the distance, it was impossible. I didn't waste any time after that. I threw my stuff into my bag, barely even bothering to fold anything. I just needed to get out of that room. I went down to the front desk and handed in my key, trying to act normal, but I must have looked pale because the old man at the desk gave me this strange look. I didn't stick around to chat though. I got the hell out of there and found a taxi to take me to the airport. I was supposed to stay in Thailand for another week, but I couldn't do it. I didn't care about the money I'd lose from canceling the rest of the trip. I just had to leave. On the plane ride home, I kept going over it in my head, trying to figure out what had happened. I even tried Googling the hotel to see if anyone else had experienced something similar, but nothing came up. No reviews mentioning weird stuff, no stories about haunted rooms, nothing. It was like whatever had happened to me was just some freak, one-time thing. I don't know. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But that photo, it was real. I deleted it as soon as I got on the plane, but it's burned into my brain. I can still see it clear as day, me lying there fast asleep, completely unaware that someone or something was standing there watching me. I've told a few people since then, but they mostly just laugh it off, like, oh, you probably just dreamed it, or maybe it was a glitch with your phone. But no, I know what I saw, and I know how it made me feel. I haven't gone back to Thailand since. In fact, I haven't done much solo traveling at all after that. Every time I think about it, I get this tight feeling in my chest, like something's crawling under my skin. I mean, what if I hadn't woken up? What if whoever or whatever it was hadn't just taken a picture? Anyway, that's my story. I know it sounds insane, but it happened. And every time I think about that night, I just get this overwhelming sense of dread. Like maybe there's something out there, something we can't explain, that watches us when we're most vulnerable. Whoever or whatever it was. I hope I never run into it again. My wife and I had just moved into this neighborhood. Quiet, peaceful, the kind of place where you know everyone's face, but maybe not their names. It's a small, tight-knit community. We'd been living there for about 6 months, and nothing unusual had ever happened. That is, until the couple next door moved in. It was around the middle of summer. They were younger, probably in their late 20s or early 30s. I remember seeing them the first day they moved in. Nothing seemed off at first. The guy was tall, with short brown hair, and the woman was petite, with long black hair that fell over her shoulders. They didn't talk much when they first arrived. They kept to themselves, and we didn't think much of it. A few days went by, and that's when the weird stuff started. We'd hear these arguments coming from their house, muffled shouting through the walls, loud thuds like something or someone was being thrown around. It wasn't every night, but often enough that we noticed. At first, we told ourselves it was just a rough patch. Couples fight. But then it got worse. I remember one night, maybe about 3 weeks after they moved in, my wife and I were sitting in the living room watching TV, and suddenly we heard this loud crash from next door. It was so loud, we both jumped out of our seats. The shouting was louder this time, more frantic. It sounded like furniture was being overturned, something heavy slamming against the walls. My wife turned to me and said, "We should check on them." Honestly, I didn't want to. Who wants to get involved in their neighbor's domestic issues, right? But the noise, the sheer violence of it felt wrong to ignore. So we went over hesitantly and knocked on their door. The husband opened it. He looked disheveled, to say the least. His hair was messy, his shirt untucked, and there was something else. I noticed it right away, a faint stain on his sleeve. At first I thought it was just paint or wine, but as I looked closer, it looked like blood. Not a lot, but enough to make me feel uneasy. I asked, "Hey, is everything all right? We heard some noise." He smiled. Well, not smiled, more like forced a smile. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just, we had a little argument. Nothing to worry about." His voice was calm, too calm, like he was trying too hard to make it sound normal. But the blood on his sleeve, the noises we'd heard, it didn't sit right with me. My wife nudged me, and I could tell she felt the same way. But what were we supposed to do? Call him out on it? Demand to see his wife? It felt awkward, so we just nodded and said, "Okay, if you're sure." We left, but as we walked back to our house, I turned to my wife and said, "Something's off about this." She agreed, but what could we do? We didn't have any proof, and maybe it really was just an argument. Couples fight all the time, right? For the next few days, things seemed quieter. No more loud arguments, no more crashes. In fact, we didn't hear anything at all from their house. It was almost like no one was there anymore. We saw the husband a couple of times. He'd leave in the morning and come back late at night, but we never saw the wife again. At first, we figured she was just staying inside or maybe went to visit family. But the longer we went without seeing her, the more uneasy I felt. Then one night, this is where it gets really creepy. It was maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the kitchen to get some water. As I stood by the window, I saw something strange. The husband was outside, loading something into the trunk of his car. It was a large, bulky sack, and the way he was moving, it was like he was trying to be quiet, trying not to be noticed. I couldn't see what was in the sack. It was tied up, and he was being careful not to drag it on the ground. But the way he struggled with it, like it was heavy, I don't know, something about it just felt wrong. I watched as he threw it into the back of his car and drove off into the night. When I told my wife about it the next morning, she got that same look of dread I'd been feeling. "You don't think?" She started, but I didn't even need her to finish. We were both thinking the same thing. Something had happened to the wife. That day, we decided to call the police. We didn't want to jump to conclusions, but after everything, the fights, the blood, the strange behavior, it felt like the right thing to do. The police came that afternoon, but by then, the husband was gone. His car, the one I'd seen him loading the sack into, was missing from the driveway. The police searched the house, but they didn't find anything. No sign of the wife, no obvious signs of foul play, nothing. The husband had vanished, and so had she. It was like they'd just disappeared. Over the next few days, the investigation ramped up. The police interviewed us several times, asking about the noises, the arguments, everything we'd seen. We told them about the night I saw him with the sack, and they seemed concerned, but without any real evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Eventually, the news came out. They believed the wife had been murdered. They never found her body, but they found traces of blood in the house. Small amounts, not enough to prove anything definitively, but enough to make them suspect foul play. The husband, though, he was gone, completely off the grid. They couldn't find him. It's been months now, and they still haven't found him. Every time I think about it, I feel this deep sense of guilt, like we should have done something sooner. Maybe if we'd called the police the first time we saw the blood, maybe if we'd pushed harder when we knew something was off, maybe she'd still be alive. Now, every time I walk by that house, I get this chill. It's still empty. No one's moved in since they disappeared, and I doubt anyone will for a long time. People around the neighborhood still talk about it sometimes in hushed whispers, like it's some kind of ghost story. But it's not just a story. It's real, and we were right in the middle of it. So yeah, that's what happened. It still haunts me, to be honest. I'll never forget that night, standing by the window, watching him load that sack into his car, feeling that something terrible had happened.